Hi all. This lesson will concentrate on language. We are continuing our examination of the human basis of culture, information you'll find highlighted on the 12th page of your first study guide, and you'll find information in the text chapter on culture related to this as well. But if you will note, under that heading of the human basis of culture at the top of page 12, you'll notice that we humans do have the capacity for symbolic communication. I usually don't ask students to, in effect, memorize definitions, but this is a definition I hope that you will become familiar with, because language is a remarkable gift that we tend to take for granted. I'm not suggesting or implying that other animals or living creatures don't communicate. They do, and they communicate quite efficiently. Some by scent, some by body movements, some by symbols, and sometimes by combination, if you will. And by symbols, with respect to animals, I'm talking literally about, for example, cries, a yell, if you will. The gibbon, for example, a variety of great ape, has anywhere from 7 to 9 vocalizations that carry with them specific meanings. And in a sense, they are symbols. But with a gibbon, you have to bear in mind again that they're limited in terms of how specific and detailed they can be in explaining a situation or a circumstance. For example, one of their cries is something along the line of danger. But that's basically about as far as they can go. If the situation is particularly dangerous, they may repeat the call at different levels of intensity. For example, seeing a potentially dangerous situation, a gibbon might cry, "Danger!" And if it's really, really dangerous, he or she might repeat it. And with each repetition, elevate the volume. Danger! 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 But if you look and focus on language, you can notice how much more specific we can be. If we see a potentially dangerous situation, like a friend, let's say, in a wilderness area, basically being eyed by a large predatory cat, we might say, "Hey, there's some movement in the tall grass to the right. You know, we were out here yesterday and we saw tracks of a big cat. That could be a big cat. I think you need to get back to the truck. It's about 10 feet to your left." You see how much more specific that is than danger? That's the value and the importance of language. Because of language, our communication system is productive. And likewise, I want you to highlight what Henslin brings out. This is noted in the textbook, the key functions and benefits of language. This, I hope, will help you to truly appreciate what we can do with language. If you notice number 1, it allows human experience to be cumulative. Think of language as a storehouse of human experience. Everything people learn, they can pass on to others. Every human generation can pass on everything it has learned to the next generation. And if you'll notice, different from a cat purring or a dog barking, language allows us to literally communicate within the context of time. We can, for example, if you look at number 2, we can basically tell someone what we did yesterday. Furthermore, we can give them information about what we hope to do for the weekend. It's not linked to the present, so we can create a shared past and a shared future. We also can develop through language shared understandings. We can create ideas, beliefs, impressions, viewpoints, interpretations, and then we can share these with others. And as Henslin points out, language is very important from the standpoint of allowing us complex, shared, and goal-directed behavior. What he focuses on is imagine trying to plan a party without language. Notice how language benefits us, both in a direct and an indirect way. Maybe the best way for you to think about language is to imagine what our lives would be like without it. What do you think would be missing? I can tell you this, our lives would not be chaotic. We would be living lives pretty similar to the great apes in the wild today. That's no insult, because these are highly social and very intelligent creatures. But if an ape disposes of a problem, what can he or she do with the information gained? Well, little if anything. But language allows humans to continue their problem-solving activities well beyond an event or an issue. Because we have language, we can share information, insights, and ideas with others. Come up with different approaches, different notions, and the like. It's kind of like this. Well, I had this problem yesterday, and this is how I solved it. The person you talk to said, well, I had the same problem last week, and this is how I solved it. You all can we can get our heads together, so to speak, and come up with an even more efficient way to solve the problem when it emerges again. Now, it's very important when you consider language not to think of languages as merely different codes, C-O-D-E-S, for the same messages. Henslin points out that learning a language involves more than just learning words, vocabulary. We acquire, through learning our language, perceptions that are embedded within the language, and in effect, language can influence the way its speakers experience. That is to say, kind of see the world, if you wish. Now, this idea is sometimes referred to as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It's also referred to as the linguistics relativity principle. Sapir was a linguist, and he argued that language influences its speakers to think of the world in certain ways because of the grammatical makeup or structure or categories within that language. In other words, language can organize vocabulary, verb, tense, adjectives, numbers, colors in different ways. One of his students, a guy by the name of Whorf, came into anthropology, got interested in linguistics after working as an insurance adjuster. And while he was doing that, he was intrigued by the fact that he noted words do have an influence on how people behave. He noticed workers moving around drums of gasoline that were marked full. They tended to be very cautious and very, very careful. But when he noticed them moving around drums of gasoline that had been marked empty, they seemed to be much more lackadaisical, sometimes leading to disastrous results. His argument was what the guys were overlooking is even though the drums of gasoline were marked empty, they were loaded with fumes, the explosive element of gasoline. And he also went on to say that, well, we don't have a word for empty, but not totally empty. He went on to do research among the Hopi Indians and came to the conclusion that those who speak different languages are not just inclined to interpret and experience the world differently, they actually do perceive and experience the world differently. So the two guys kind of combined some ideas. Neither one of them pushed really, truly the notion that language determines thought and determines culture. But in effect, this is kind of the notion that was the focus of their thesis or their hypothesis. Today, very few researchers buy into the idea that language determines culture and determines how we think. They've kind of adopted, I suppose, what you could call a weaker version of the original hypothesis or principle. Language doesn't determine how we think. It doesn't determine the content of a culture, but the structures of a language, the language habits of a particular society, can perhaps influence and impact how people interpret and then react to the world. For example, there are some languages that have a gender reference assigned to nouns. In other words, these nouns are classified either as feminine or masculine. And within the grammar structure of these languages, these nouns, interestingly enough, are treated differently. Now, the whole point of the matter, think about this for a moment. Do these assignments of gender reference to a noun really cause people to, in effect, view or interpret the nouns based upon qualities and characteristics of particular genders? Well, let's check it out. Do all of you recognize this? Key. In Spanish, key is a feminine noun. And when Spanish speakers describe a key, they often use the following terms: well-shaped, shiny, lovely, small. But in German, key is masculine. And German speakers often describe key using the following: jagged, heavy, hard. Now, on the other hand, focus on this. Do you recognize it? A suspension bridge. In Spanish, suspension bridge, expansion bridge, is masculine. And the terms often used by Spanish speakers to refer to such bridges are strong, sturdy, big. But in German, fascinatingly enough, the noun is feminine. And the words often used to describe it are elegant, pretty, fragile, beautiful. So apparently, assigning a gender reference to a noun might impact how people envision or even think about an object, a place, or a thing. Now, I suspect most of you recognize this has probably not been lost on politicians, on powerful interest groups, and large organizations who often use catchy phrases to get our attention. Lutz took it one step further, and he made the argument that language can sometimes be employed to literally mislead, confuse, aggravate, and encourage people to think in particular ways. He referred to this as doublespeak. And for him, doublespeak was an evasive, ambiguous, literally overblown language that was intended to deceive and confuse. Now, you might think of it as analogous to certain notions that showed up in George Orwell's well-known science fiction novel, 1984. He referenced doublespeak and newspeak, for example. But in effect, what was interesting, I said just a moment ago, he emphasized doublespeak. He really didn't. He emphasized doublethink and newspeak. He never really injected the term doublespeak. But for Lutz, doublespeak, again, is that type of a language that misleads. It distorts. It pretends to communicate, but it tends to avoid and shift responsibility. It creates false impressions. It limits. It conceals. It really prevents productive thought. And it creates a lot of inconsistencies and confusions. And in some cases, it takes the form of what he called semantics. If something's classified, well, that means it's secret. Collateral damage means killing innocent bystanders. Enhanced interrogation, well, that means torture. Negative patient care outcome, again, death. Revenue enhancement, that's a tax increase. And then there are those terms that kind of, if you will, are designed to make something more important than it really is. It kind of makes what seems to be ordinary extraordinary. You don't have a used automobile. No. You have an experienced automobile. This person is not a manicurist. No. This person is a nail technician. And likewise, there's no longer janitors. They're sanitary engineers, if you wish. And you don't refer to low-level employees in that way. You want to make them look a little bit more and sound a little bit more dignified. So you refer to them as associates. Now, although there isn't a lot of evidence out there to indicate how culture may impact, or for that matter, influence a language's grammar, setup, or system, There's a lot of evidence, however, that highlights that cultures can impact and affect vocabulary. In short, within the vocabulary of a language, there are often lots and lots of words about that which is important to the speakers of that language or adaptively significant. This is sometimes called cultural emphasis or focal with an F, vocabulary. For example, among the New Era, an Eastern African pastoralist group or society, which focuses a great deal of attention on cattle. No surprise, there are many words to describe cattle. But even here in the United States, truck drivers have a lot of words to refer to their rig, as do those who engage in snowboarding. Think about all of the fancy terms we have for technology, suggesting that in our culture, technology is very important. And although it's pretty difficult to identify one area, absolute area of cultural emphasis or interest in the United States, most would probably agree that an interest in sport is shared by lots of Americans. Hence, there are a number of colloquialisms or familiar statements in American English that really have their origin in a variety of sport. Can you pick up this sport? You're way off base. He or she went to bat for me. Come on, give me a ballpark figure. I want to touch base with you. You dropped the ball. Do you recognize the sport? You got it. It's baseball. How about these? I'm going to drop back 5 and punt. You're in the red zone now. That was a first down play. You recognize the sport? Of course, it's football. And I think a lot of you probably recognize too that some of these kind of sport colloquial statements even have a link to romance, if not sex. Well, I struck out. I didn't even get to first base. I hit a home run. She threw me a curve. I scored. Hence, some researchers have argued and firmly believe that language does reflect a culture of which it is a part, rather than determining its content. I hope all of this will give you pause to think about the significance and the importance of language. We tend to take it so much for granted, but it is an absolutely wonderful gift. We'll continue our analysis of the makeup of culture in the next lesson.